Well, I, I knew as soon as I started, and the people who worked on the web team already knew that this is 2006. The last website had really been built about 98, 99, and they already knew, and I knew that we needed a new kind of website. That a lot had changed in that space of time. 98, the map moves slowly, cautiously, methodically, and while there were other places around then that understood what web technology was, that wasn't really cemented at that point. We didn't have the popular open source CMSs. We didn't really have CMSs in 98. We knew how to build them, and they were big ones. You could spend $200,000 on I forget what they're called, but the systems that were popular then, and they're gone now, and basically it had been built custom. It covered very little of the website. We needed developers to make simple text changes. Like, everybody knew this wasn't right. But there is a process at a big established institution of gaining the trust where, and knowing how to phrase the argument, right? So it was a couple years of getting used to how that website worked, getting used to the people at the institution that I needed to work with, before we really framed that case. And then it started, so maybe about 2.5 years into my tenure, we started making that case. And it was kind of a joint case between web and IT. Web was not part of IT. We were parallel departments, but there were developers in the IT department worked on the website. So if we were able to communicate this jointly, it was going to be a lot more successful. So we did that. Part of that was the CTO, Michael Belkin. A big part of it was the deputy CTO, Douglas Hegley, who's now at Minneapolis Institute of Arts. And we started making the case. At that time, we were all reporting to Emily Rafferty, the president. So we talked about how important it was. We talked about how it would improve our response time. 3 weeks to make a simple text change is unacceptable. And we were going to fix that. And everybody could understand that. So we made the case. We started working on vendor selection. One thing we knew is that there is a standard process for building a new website, and that we were not experienced in it. So we knew we needed to go outside, and we broadly knew we needed to go outside. We less broadly, the technology people who understood the web, in IT and in web, understood that user research needed to be an important part of what we did, and that we didn't have experience in this particular kind of user research. So at that point, the institution understood we needed to seek out a partner, that it was going to cost some money, and that it was going to involve a whole lot of people internally. This was right around the time that we started to understand Tom Campbell was going to be the new director. He was quite interested in technology, understood its importance, and just what it was going to mean to the institution going forward. So it was pretty good timing. The vendor selection process happened throughout the time that he was being selected as director and hired. And then by the time we were ready to start, having selected CogApp from Brighton, England as our partner, Tom was firmly ensconced in the new position, and ready to lead. And one of the great things about all this is that we, were talking to the highest levels of the institution. We formed a steering committee. It included Douglas, myself, Morgan Holzer, our project manager, and then the most senior staff, executive staff in the institution, including the director and the president, as a steering committee for the project. We were able to accept CogApp's process as our process. We all understood that we needed to have a process, and that this is something they do all the time that we're not that familiar with. And one of the things they recommended was that we begin with discovery, which is typical. We all know you do discovery, you do interviews, you do user interviews. This was the first time that the Met had gone out to ask the visitors what they think for just about anything. So it was a pretty big step, but it was a comfortable step because it was so familiar to CogApp, and it was, their experience was reassuring. But the other thing they recommended was that we start with a strategy document, a vision statement for what the website is for and what it's going to do and what it's going to be, what it means to the institution. And that is still, sometimes you write these things. Sometimes you write these things and you never go back to them. It turns out to have been a waste of time. But that document is still our guiding principle. It has the goals for the website very clearly stated. One of them is, appreciation and understanding of art and art history via the collections. One of them is support for physical visits to the institution. One of them is maximizing online sources of revenue. These are equal goals. There's no priority to these. We seek out all three of these goals in everything we do. Still today, it drives the way my group works. This is a really successful strategy process. One interesting thing to say about that is 10 years ago, 13 years ago, starting at Brooklyn Museum, and I think it wasn't that uncommon in the museum world in general, everybody wanted to know, how is this web thing going to drive visitation to the institution? And it drove me nuts. Like, can't you see beyond the physical visitation? Can't you see that this can be a thing unto itself, right? And then, 10 years later, when we started the process, I saw it in a completely different way. One of our primary goals is supporting and encouraging visitation to the institution. We all know that the object is primary, right? You need to be in the presence of the artwork to appreciate it. Nobody ever questioned that. I never questioned that. But what I had seen as a lack of vision 10 years before now seemed like a challenge. And I think part of it was inside me, understanding that I can't just get analytics data that tell me, who came and saw the thing, right? This is hard, figuring out whether the website actually supported and encouraged the physical visit. So now I was able to see it as a challenge. And I think a lot of that a lot of my acceptance of that has to do with sort of the museum culture changing over those 10 years and knowing that we now see websites differently, but also the internal support for the project from the highest levels of the institution. Just knowing that we were going to be able to do something great.